Hey, welcome everybody for another installment of our podcast for the Church in Indian Country. For those who don't know, this is actually a joint project between the USCCB, the Subcommittee of Native American Affairs, and the Tekakwitha Conference. We've come together to produce these podcasts once a month. We have always a very special and very important guest with us to talk about the Catholic-Native relationships, so that continues. And we have a very important guest here today. Our guest here is Father Patrick Twohy, Jesuit, who has done a lot of amazing things in Indian Country. And now he specializes in his work with urban natives. For those who don't know, most natives actually live in urban areas. I think it's, the statistics I've seen says about 2/3 live in big cities rather than on reservations or in urban or in rural areas. So it's an important aspect, both of the Subcommittee of Native American Affairs, but also our own interest to make sure that they're not forgotten as we work with Native Indigenous throughout the country. So I'll let Father Patrick introduce himself.
Thank you, Mike, David, everyone. I'd like to be brief. My experience with Native people began in 1973. I lived for 11 years and worked with people there on the Colville Res, the 12 bands there for 11 years. And then I moved to the coast to work with Coast Salish tribes that border the Coast Salish Sea. And I've been there ever since. And most of my life I lived on the res, 35 years on the res, and moved from there. And then my Archbishop, Archbishop Brunette, asked me to spread the work more, see what could happen more. And I moved into the city to do that. I live in a Jesuit community at Seattle University. And so I worked from there, and I do work with Native population, especially the Native homeless population in the Seattle area, and some in Tacoma, but there's two different kinds of ministry I found in the urban setting. Here now with the Coast Salish, I still go back to the reses, of course, because they're all my friends. So I work with eight reservations also, mainly funerals and hospitals and ceremonies, and plus the Indian work in the urban setting.
You seem like you've been involved in a wide variety of ministries, both in terms of reservations, but also now in terms of the big cities of Seattle and Tacoma and other cities. Yeah. What would you say would be the most pressing problems you see that facing natives, especially in the urban areas?
Some alcohol still, but mainly drugs on the res and in the city. So in the city, definitely. And the drugs are opioids, mainly, though anything will do. And when people are suffering like that, but they're getting increasingly dangerous because of fentanyl in the heroin. The club asked itself, Chief Seattle Club asked itself, which has been in Native leadership for a long time. It's just all Native and a Native board and everything, which is a dream come true. They decided to tackle homelessness first in that circle. They felt that was the most important way to start. And most of Seattle City feels that way, I think, now too. Then you can start working on learning to work, or possibilities for work. And then you can start working towards well-briety. We're using that term a lot now. It's a healing of the whole person, which includes the spiritual dimensions. And then we have always nurses on staff and references to doctors. And also we work closely with the Indian Health, federal state-sponsored organization. So it's trying to treat the whole person, that way. And those are all valuable. You could start anywhere there, but the club thought housing is first, and they've done incredible efforts to find housing, and they just put up a new housing complex themselves right next to the Chief Seattle Club where the people can meet. So that's sort of what the approach is, and the spiritual is always part of it. Within the club itself, we have a sacred circle, and there's so many. As you know, intertribal is the word in the city, so everybody's here. 1/3 is from Alaska, and then the rest is from all over North America. So a lot from Midwest, Southwest, everywhere. They end up in Seattle, and they can end up on the streets if they're unfortunate. And so that sacred spaces can be used for native ceremonies of the different ways, depending on where the people come from. And also we've had mass there, and circles, talking circles, Wilbriety circles.
Tell and notice right away that you have this really emotional connection to the people you minister with. And I think that's what makes a very good priest. It's not so much head stuff, but it's heart stuff. It's working with people and then feeling what they're feeling, the heartache, the problems, the difficulties, even the joys and celebrations. I think that really makes a really great priest. You mentioned a lot about what you've been doing, and especially what the Chief Seattle Club has been doing. What do you think, in terms of the Catholic Church, what do you think they should be doing for outreach for natives in big cities like New York or San Francisco or Chicago? What should the Catholic Church be focused on in terms of the native ministry inside these big cities?
I can really only speak from my experience in Seattle that having a place where people know it's there and it's steady and honest, and they have housing and they have all the help you need, and they know how to refer you to health agencies, state health agencies, federal. It's all right there. And so people know about it. And we have our spiritual work there too, and we have funerals there. It's a place where people know it's solid for them, really respectful of them. And if someone dies, a lot of time it's a lonely death, leaning against a fence somewhere, and no money or no connections, a long way from home in every sense, and any home within themselves. One thing we're running into also, which probably is everywhere, is gangs among the young men and some young women too, in an urban setting at one of the tribes south of me. They sort of want to be gangsters, and they're really young and they don't know what that is, but they're trying to be that, and they're trying to run gangs, and they shooting each other up. So I just was talking this morning with Chester Cayuse, a healer, a Jesuit. He's a spiritual healer in the Coast Salish way, and a good one, a medicine person. And he's been called down from the res down there. And it can be a total nightmare. You know, kids all shot up, a different family, because everybody's got guns. And it's hurting everybody, but it hurts the young tribal kids. And he said it so clearly. He said they don't have anything. And what he was saying is they don't have a sacred way of life. It was taken from them. They never had an opportunity. Their folks didn't have it, and their grandparents didn't have it. They lost contact with their whatever tribal life when there at Coast Salish. They didn't have the connection. They don't know what it is. And when he comes down to do work, they're stunned at the power of the work, the spiritual work, but they have no connection to it in their lives. No one's taught them. But now they're asking him to come down and talked to them. And they listened to him. Yeah.
It sounds like the Chief Seattle Club is a very good organization that perhaps could be duplicated throughout the big cities, just especially those who have a large Native population. So perhaps I can contact you or just research the Chief Seattle Club and find out how to do that, how to replace what the good work that you've been doing.
I'm sure that just their website would be excellent, and the director's magnificent. We've had a great series of directors, all native, so they talk turkey. It's just straight across the board. And sure, they're open. I know they're open to help. Yeah, share what they can.
In terms of sharing, what you talked about is that for the USCCB, we're working on this a national plan for Native and Indigenous ministry. And it's a very, very important work, and I'm very proud and very happy to be a part of that work. And we're trying to get a lot of dialogue from different Native groups and organizations. But how, if you're going to write a section from this pastoral plan, this pastoral plan is one of the audiences is the entire Catholic Church in the United States. People who just don't know about Native and Indigenous ministries, and especially in the urban area. So what would you put in the pastoral plan just to talk to this audience? What's important about this ministry, especially with Indigenous in urban areas?
That's a very big undertaking. Over the years, I think I came to it really early on when I was on the Colville Res and on the plateau, east of the mountains. And then since I've been on the coast, because of the complexity of what these young people are growing up in, and each family carries certain family laws and histories. I feel that the young have to have time to sort everything out, whether they want to relate to their original spiritual ways. Here it would be Siawan or Skalalitud, and live that, and that's through longhouse, smokehouse ceremonies, and training. Or do you want to have any relationship with the church that your grandma follows, or not? And undoubtedly, they don't know, because there's so much media and confusion thrown at them, and a lot is broken down. Like their parents quit a long time ago going to church, and luckily if there's grandparents, they usually carry the load. But I always felt the main thing is stay in touch with them while they're sorting it out. They have some choices, and they too are facing easy access to drugs, which kill them at an alarming rate. It's just evil incarnate, opioids, and it's all there for them. It used to be, for me growing up, and then for my guys my age and the guys in their 60s and 70s, we grew up with alcohol. But what these kids grow up around is so complex. And I know of them because I baptized, I'm about 5 generations now with them. And so I know their grandparents and great-grandparents, and sometimes great-great-grandparents. I know what they're from. But each one has to figure it out. Where are they going to align? Of what spiritual ways do they want, or any? Because they're so distracted by all the media that's going on all the time in their phones and around them. And the tribes have done a lot of youth efforts. And since they are running stronger economies, they've been able to build youth centers, phenomenal youth centers, and be able to fund youth activities and do amazing stuff I wouldn't have dreamed of when I was first, because when I started, everything was just pretty much dirt poor and real hard. But then things started moving a bit later, 70s. And then there was the Indian Religious Freedom Act around 78. A lot of these things had a forward push to them. So on the one hand, they're growing up there's been an Indian, we call it the Indian Renaissance sometimes, since the 70s. Art, writers, carving, weaving, and the long, we call them smokehouses here, full of dancers and singers. And so on the one hand, you have a tremendous amount of vitality and creativity being unleashed, and the tribe can support that and support wherever the kids want to do in education. But at the same time, the kids have a hard time, and they're not a problem to be solved. They don't like that. They aren't. And they're to be treated as equality of love and respect. And they know when people are sort of looking down at them or trying to fix them, and it's very much resented.
But what would you say would be the most important in terms of reconciling the Catholic Church with the Native Indigenous communities, especially in the urban areas?
Well, being there somehow humbly, as Pope Francis always teaches, you're there in a humble manner, and you be there with them, and they have to take the lead. Because there was a long time where it's like the church, and the colonial system is so wrapped up in that, save the Indians from themselves. As one of my friends once told me, he said, "You missionaries, you came to save us from ourselves." I got down on my knees. There's a lot of truth in that. So no, we're not. That's what we do now, is we walk with, and they're in the lead. And we ask them, where's it going? The tribes tried so much for their young, because the high priorities, as you know, are the elders and the young. And so both get a lot of attention. And the young get a lot of attention, and intertribal gatherings, and there's so many good things. We focus on our losses sometimes. But if I had done that, if I had focused on losses, I would have killed myself a long time ago. Because we're always in the middle of struggle, and we have victories. We have victories too, and these young people gradually sort it out. If they live through all the complexities and they make their decisions, they know the history of the church as they grow up. They learn it in school, they learn it at the universities if they go on to education, and they're horrified, angry, and they can't understand why grandma or grandpa still follows that. But eventually they make their decisions and what they're going to follow and what they're going to believe in. And it's a privilege to accompany that. It's a great privilege to walk with that. And it's not easy. It's not easy. But they can be, I remember I knew her from the time she was a baby, and she was absolutely brilliant. She was headed for college, and beautiful girl. And and she got on really a bad road, and she was using everything. One night I was visiting her folks and her grandparents, and she came and drove up, and she ran out of the car. She gave me a hug. She couldn't have weighed 80 pounds. And I knew she was dying. And I knew we couldn't stop her. But her grandma was one of the strong Catholic grandmas for sure. Never gave up on her and prayed and prayed. She wouldn't allow her to shoot up and be in the house and that stuff. But she never gave up. And then her third trip to treatment, she stopped. Unbelievable. And now she's totally responsible. She leads the Wellbriety Clinic for the tribe. She's got a couple of kids and a nice fellow. And so it can happen. But a lot of times it's a real hard to get there. Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty powerful story. I'd like to bring Father David back in to see if he has any questions that you'd like to ask.
Well, first of all, that's amazing testimony, Father Twohy, that you've just given, and your whole life's work, is obviously one of that deep, sincere concern as you talk about accompanying and walking with people. And I just really appreciate your work, your whole life's experience, and also your testimony here today. And one thing I really notice about you, in addition to what you say, is how you say it. Oftentimes the fruit of our experiences can be seen in the way they affect us. And certainly you very obviously have spent a lot of time with really holy elders in Native tradition, and that comes across in your own humility, and I just think that's amazing. So God bless you for that. A few thoughts, just some random thoughts that I had while I was listening to you is and some of this is kind of piggybacking on conversations in our last interview that we did with Robert Aberlay there in Rapid City, a member of the Cheyenne River Lakota community, or their tribe in South Dakota. And he deals with a lot of like Native suicides and a lot of Native teenagers in an urban city, in Rapid City. What I was kind of thinking about as you were talking, I was kind of reflecting on some of my experiences in some of the Native intertribal, like large cities with intertribal communities, like for example, Denver, Colorado. Yeah. There's a lot of natives in Denver, Colorado, and they're very organized, and they have been for quite some time. In fact, they have intertribal centers, they have powwows, they have places where you can go and you can, go into sweat lodge, and you have they have a really strong identity, I think, at least in my experience from being there. And yeah, you do still have the Native homeless problem, as you mentioned. You do have the struggles with alcohol and opioids and methamphetamines and all these other things, but you also have really strong, resilient people and community leaders who have taken leadership in their communities. And I think like one great example you actually mentioned, you talked about the Daybreak Star Center, which that in of itself is a great example of community people coming together, because the whole reason that thing exists in the first place is because the people, the community, the intertribal Indians said, regarding a federal law that unused federal land could then be deferred back to Native people. So it was an abandoned military base, and they took it by occupation. And this was before the American Indian movement even. I mean, they did it of their own accord, and they were out there, and lo and behold, they got what they wanted. It became a cultural center, and it still exists to this day. It's a great success story. I'm glad you mentioned that, and I'm glad that it's still running strong. That's awesome. And it's an example, I think, and of course, as I mentioned, the American Indian movement, that's another example of urban Indians coming together to address the concerns of natives in urban environments, as you know, obviously, beginning in Minneapolis, St. Paul in 1968, before becoming a nationwide entity. But so it is obvious that there are really great things that can come from intertribal networks within urban environments where natives come together, and good things have come and will continue to come out of that. However, it is also obvious to me, and you did address this quite a lot, that there is something of an identity crisis when people are taken away from their cultural center.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a disconnect with identity problems and just with balance, and the balance between their reality as a tribal person and a person in an urban environment. And especially for people who are second, third generation city Indians, who maybe never really had a strong connection with that tribal connection. And it seems like that is the root of quite a lot of problems that we see with natives in urban environments. You mentioned the gang problem, and unfortunately, natives in gangs is not anywhere near a new problem. Like even in the early 90s, I remember a lot of problems with some of the natives in Denver, Colorado being involved with gangs. We've also heard stories of some of the Los Angeles-based gangs kind of hiding out with some of the Navajo Nation. And but I guess my question is what do you think some of the particular struggles are for natives in urban areas that maybe are different than those experienced by natives on reservations?
I appreciate what you're saying. I've been a little bit in Denver too, and I've seen the power there. Let me be honest. All the years I lived on the res, that's 35 years I lived and worked on the res, and I grew accustomed to it. In fact, when I go back now for funerals and gatherings and things, I'm at home on the res. I'm really at home. It's like I just sort of relax into it. To find that in the city is a lot harder. That's just for me, because everything's so spread out and potentially confusing and difficult. In all those years I lived on the res, especially all the early years, we'd see people come back from the city to work for the tribe as the tribes developed their economies, and a lot of that. And they come back, and there's a sense of they're unknown. Even though they're tribal members, it takes a long time for them to really re-enter in to what is theirs by their actual bloodlines and all that. But they're sort of don't know, and they have to re-enter, and they have to become known again and trusted. And even for Native students graduating from universities, and there's more women than men that do that, for us anyway. They come back, they all have this desire to come back and make it better. All the ones I've known from the different tribes, it's always common. I want to go home. I may do a little work now to get trained and do more education, but I'm coming home to help the people. Well, they have to come back very humbly because they have to be accepted again. And they grew up there even, they grew up in these, and they come back and there's sort of a suspicion that they've become non-Indian, or they've been infected by something that isn't what the people are used to in terms of manners, and they are affected, and what they're involved in and how they proceed and how they speak. Everything about them is noticed. And so it's best if they can be humble and wait as that process takes hold. And here's the one I wanted to say. It's a little embarrassing, but when I was on the res all those years, on the real res scene, that's the scene I knew. And I always had the same feeling, like when natives would come back who'd been gone a long time sometimes. Then some come back, some of the young ones are coming back. I had the same feeling. How are they going to reconnect? Do they really belong here anymore? and those kind of things. And generally it plays out that they do, but it takes time. And it wasn't until I've been working with Native homeless, this area of things, and but I realized it takes so much more courage to be Native in the city. It's not a given. You're not standing on your own homeland. You are, but it's the homeland that's been taken from you. And so, and you're not wanted on what was originally your ancestors' home. And so you have to have enormous courage to stick with it and to be Indian, to find ways of doing that. And some, of course, they're in every level of society. They're at the universities, they're in Microsoft and Amazon, and there's not one place for them in the city. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
But some choose to they still want to claim that they're Native. And somehow to do that, and it can be working with Native youth or working with something to be connected again, or as you say, with these cultural centers, or helping at the club, things like that. But when you're home, but this is not, this is never that. The urban isn't that. It's a beautiful in so many ways and so many opportunities, but it's a difficult place also.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And certainly I sympathize. I can completely identify with a lot of your, the whole thing about going home. There are, as you talk about Natives in Microsoft and all that, there are great examples of success stories. I mean, obviously from your community. I mean, the great writer, Sherman Alexie, I mean, he's brilliant. He's got books. He's a award-winning writer. He's got movies based on his books, and he comes from that environment. And so, yeah, there are success stories. Sherman Alexie being just one of them. What role, if any, does the church play in that? And I mean, what role can we play in that, in helping people to be more grounded, more centered, more balanced between their tribal identity and home? Home is home, and you're always going to feel connected to that, and their urban reality. What role can we play, or should we play in that?
There has been something, I don't know if we've ever really addressed it, but there's, the whole missionary effort. The Jesuits started in the Northwest in the 1840s. There was a tremendous effort to convert and to educate. That's the gift of the Jesuit charism, is to teach, And then, of course, along with it went, the cutting of the hair and the clothes and the disrespect for family law and teachings and all the teachings. So it left an enormous disconnect that's been passed down all these years. So our approach now is much more humble, I think, necessarily, because the people have moved on and they're sorting out whether they want any relationship with Catholicism or not, or maybe another church, or just to follow the old way, or just follow whatever they want to follow. But it's different now. We come in very humbly, and we're trying to figure out where they want to go. And to be absolutely honest, since in 50 years, I've never had very many people in church on Sundays. I told the Western Canada bishops that, funerals, everybody's there. The entire people, the entire village. And then special baptisms, if they still want that, and confirmation, and marriage occasionally, and some kind of reconciliation, though that can take many forms, and death primarily, which is the most important part of the of the person's traveling life into the next world. And for some reason, we are called upon all the time for that.